I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I think listening to what you said and having read about your experience with the intensive care unit, it sounded like what you did was to sort of abandon the typical approach to providing medicine. Is that fair to say?
They would agree with you. I wanted in decision making, I wanted to remove the emotional threat response, which I thought was found very common in medicine, very prevalent, but it's unrecognized. And I wanted to organize what was our goal, what was our objective here. The easiest way to do it is when I'd have a complex patient, I would take over the service, and what's wrong with the patient? And typically they would tell me what the fluids and electrolytes. So I'd make a long list. Everybody had to put on the list what was wrong with the patient. Then I organized it and demonstrated to them that generally there's only 4 problems with a patient. 1 is going to kill them, 1 keeps them in the intensive care unit, and the other 2 are not an issue. And if we could focus on what's going to kill them first, all of a sudden they could think. Their brain wasn't so full. And that got away from the idea of let's come up with a diagnosis. So you're right. In that sense, I wasn't following what's the diagnosis. Once we get the diagnosis, that'll determine the treatment, and the treatment determines success. A very deterministic linear model. I went into one of let's identify what's going to kill the person first, focus on that, whatever it takes to stop that. The diagnosis will come from response to therapy. So I started teaching that diagnoses is a response to therapy approach. So it's not abandoned, but I maybe augmented it.
And a follow-up to that, you mentioned that in some cases different outcomes may be scrutinized even by your peers and interpreted as failure, when in fact it's maybe not a failure. How then, if you're taking a different approach, how would you have any advice for someone if they're wanting to implement a new program or take a new approach? How do you get the opportunity to let that play out and until you can show some results, if that makes sense?
Yeah, that does make sense. I would say that it's forced me to look for the basic sciences, not the interpretive or review material, but the very, very basic material. What I would tell people is that if you're going to use this approach, which does work, your greatest threat actually is going to be your colleagues, the administrators, because they may not understand it. I've had a number of times of my care was reviewed. Some of that was later published as when nobody's encountered survivors from hangings. So you're criticized on how that patient was managed. Then you find out there's no literature for it, so that you publish it. So this is how what you do. You encounter these things, but that forces you to justify what you're doing on the basic science, not the medical literature so much. When I went into the brain response, I have to go into neuroanatomy, neurohormones, neuroendocrine, decision theory. I had to go into combat decision-making approaches, Boyd's OODA loop. I went down as far as I could to the very, very basic primary material to where it became inarguable. It didn't make me popular, but I wanted to make sure that I was at that very point, and that's probably the most significant if you're going to do this. You really have to know your hard science to justify that psychology, social psychology. You have to know that very, very well.
Thank you. Admiral Eccles, one of the things that stands out in your presentation is that while there is some discussion of